Hello, and welcome to episode number 143 of WrestleRotica, the podcast that combines wrestling with erotica. This week we have 3 stories to share with you. The first story is entitled Meeting Dean. A Loki fan wins a contest to attend a local SmackDown and tour the backstage area. While backstage, Dean Ambrose notices her and decides to show her around. However, he struggles to control his emotions and soon finds himself throwing himself at the fan. The second story is entitled Renee Young / Paige Lesbian Fanfiction. Renee Young doesn't know what it is about Paige that makes her extremely nervous. Paige is also unsure about how Renee Young feels. However, the two quickly find out that they have mutual feelings for each other. The third and final story is entitled The God and Goddess. At Wrestle Kingdom 13, the WWE is putting on a co-promotional event with New Japan. After watching Kenny Omega's match, Alexa Bliss decides to reward the Queener. Without further ado, let's get to this week's stories. This story is entitled Meeting Dean, and it was written by Fakewad.com user Moxie Girl. As I stood in my hotel room getting ready for SmackDown, I still couldn't believe I was going backstage. Are you sure you're good with this? I asked my best friend Jen for the 1,000th time. If I wasn't, would you not do it? She replied. No! No! No, I still would, but I would feel bad, I said. Exactly, she laughed. When we bought our tickets for both the Raw near our hometown and the SmackDown a couple of hours away, we entered a contest for a VIP package that included a backstage pass and a chance to meet the superstars and divas. I won, and it was only one pass, so she was going to grab some dinner while she waited me to call her for a ride back. There's no way in hell I would stand between you and your chance to meet Dean Ambrose. She teased as she stood next to me at the mirror. It wouldn't end well. I agreed. We both knew that this is what I was excited about. There were many SmackDowns it would have been cool to meet, and divas, like Paige too, although there was only one I was crawling out of my skin over. As I turned from the mirror for her inspection, I wore short, cut-off jeans and an explicit Mox Violence tank top, paired with my girly combat boots and unstable Dean Ambrose sweatshirt. I thought I looked pretty good. Jen apparently thought I needed to do something different with my hair. Since that's what best friends are for, I let her do whatever she wanted to it before we left. It turned out I needed to be straightened a little bit and left down. She was right. I looked pretty awesome when she was done. When it was time to leave, I shoved my ID, cell, and debit card in my pockets, because I hate carrying a purse if I don't have to. Plus, she had hers, so anything else I needed, she could hold for me. We jumped in her SUV and headed to the arena. Naturally, we stood outside for a while before the doors opened, and we stopped at a concession booth to buy a couple of overpriced Cokes before we made it to our seats. Ringside, of course, because we went all out for this experience and called it a vacation too. In fact, we'd be staying in town a couple of days and doing who knows what before we had to return to normal life. The show was great. There were lots of great matches, and we had a blast. When it was over, we walked out of the seating area together, and she walked as far as she could with me before we went our separate ways. Be careful, she said. Always! You too. I'll call you in a little bit, I replied. After she walked away, I turned around and gave the security guy my backstage pass. He looked it over and opened the door behind him. Another guy, also security I guessed, was waiting to give me my tour. He seemed pretty unpleasant, and I was pretty sure he just wanted me to hurry up so he could go home. A few minutes into the tour, this became blatantly obvious. I met Natalya, which was pretty cool. Yes! And shook hands with a couple of the superstars before I saw him. Dean Ambrose was standing in the hallway, drinking a bottle of water, and my heart stopped. This was it. I was really going to meet Dean Ambrose. I hadn't realized my feet stopped moving until Mr. Hurry Up asked me what I was waiting for. Dean must have noticed the guy was a jerk, because he walked over and introduced himself to me. After stuttering out an impressive, "Hi, I'm Melinda," I shook his hand. Then I stood there and stared at him like an idiot. Noticing my tour guide's impatience and/or my incompetence, I couldn't say which, Dean asked him what we were doing. "She won a contest. Gets to come backstage and meet some of the talent," he said, rolling his eyes. "I'll take her," Dean said, causing an involuntary squeaking noise to leave my throat. Hopefully he didn't hear that. "What?" Mr. Hurryup asked. "You clearly don't want to be here, and I have nothing better to do. I can walk around the hallway just as easily as you can. Besides, I think she likes me better." Dean answered with a wink in my direction at that last statement. At this point, I almost died, which was only more imminent when my lovely tour guide said, "All right, whatever," and walked away. Suddenly, he spun toward me, grabbing both of my wrists and slamming me into the nearby wall. Before I had a single thought, he was kissing me with all the force I could have imagined. The feel of him against me and his display of control nearly undid me, and I forgot we were in a private place as I kissed him back. After a moment, his right hand slipped from my waist and worked its way up my arm. Slowly he trailed that magnificent hand across my shoulder and up my neck. When he paused, I thought he would squeeze, but he didn't. Continuing to my face, he held my cheek, and the strokes of his tongue slowed to an aching sweetness. He stroked my face with his thumb, and my mouth with his tongue, until I thought I would die. Then his hand slid into my hair, and the game changed again. The sweetness was gone as he gripped my hair and wrenched my head to the side. Letting go of my other wrist, he grabbed my thigh and hitched my leg over his hip. Now, with my left hand still on his back, I was able to lace my right hand through his curls. Growling, he reached for my other leg and used the wall as leverage to hold up without breaking his stride. My legs wrapped around his torso, my hand in his hair, his tongue dancing with mine. I was completely unaware of the world around us, at least until I heard the half-laugh/half cough coming from behind him. Slowly coming down to reality, I saw Roman Reigns standing in the hall with a smirk on his face. "Seriously, Dean?" Realizing what just happened, I slid my feet to the floor, face flushed from both Dean and embarrassment, and tried to be invisible while I waited for Dean to finish talking to Roman. I was only a few moments before he grabbed my hand and tugged me down the hallway. I wasn't entirely sure where we were going, but at this point, he could have dragged me into a cellar and chained me up without much of a complaint. Approaching a rental car, which I assumed was his, he opened the passenger door for me. After I climbed inside, he shut the door and got in the driver's seat. Without saying a word, he drove to a nearby hotel, parked, and opened the door. Still following him in silence, he led the way to a room on the second floor and held the door for me to enter. I barely had time to take my jacket off before his hands were in my hair and he was kissing me again. This time, only slightly more prepared, I was able to grab hold of his biceps and return the violent strokes of his tongue a few seconds quicker. Wasting no time at all, he backed me up to the bed until my feet could go no further and I fell backwards. Slipping his leather jacket off, he followed me down, crawling over me and not ever losing his focus. As he continued to crawl forward, I was left with no choice but to slide back onto the bed, and when I was where he wanted me, he pulled my arms out from under me, forcing my head to fall back. Again holding my wrist, he shifted them above my head and held them both in his left hand, his right hand gliding down my arm and my ribs to rest on my hand. He looked down at me, the fierceness in his eyes making me gasp. Then, with a cocky grin, he resumed the kissing. As his mouth moved from mine down my jawbone and to my neck, I could feel the warmth pulling between my thighs. I wanted to touch him, but he wouldn't let go of my hands. Arching my back, as his teeth scraped across my collarbone, I groaned in either pleasure or agony. I'm not sure which. Finally, he released my wrist, but before I could reach out for him, he was up and dragging his shirt over his head. When he reached out for me again, it was only to repeat the action with my shirt. For a moment he just looked at me, and I was mesmerized by him. his defined abdomen leading up to nipples that begged to be licked, broad, strong shoulders, followed by toned arms. But the most amazing thing by far was his smile and the way he was looking at me. After what felt like forever, but was probably about 10 seconds, he leaned in to kiss me again. This time with the aching sweetness I felt only briefly back at the arena, and I could swear I heard him whisper, just before his lips met mine. Putting his weight onto his left arm, and sweeping his right hand down my torso, stopping only briefly to finger my belly ring.
What?
He made his way to the button on my shorts. Flicking it open, he continued to the zipper, and proceeded to slowly push them down my hips. He stopped there, and moved his hand back up to my bra, opening the front clasp and freeing my breast. He growled as he cupped one breast in his hand and sucked the nipple into his mouth. My breathing hitched as I wrapped my fingers in his hair and arched my back, giving him easier access. After a moment of suckling and licking, he released the nipple and went to work on the other. As the cold air completed the torture on the now wet and sensitive peak, he slipped his hand back down my stomach and into my cold shorts. I cried out as he reached the most tender spot, and he bent down gently as he began to rub small circles with his fingers. He kept up the pace and the pressure until it was almost pain, before he lifted his head and slowly kissed me again. The orgasm came fast and hard, and I cried out as I dug my nails into his shoulders. After the waves of ecstasy subsided, he took his hand back long enough to finish pulling my shorts off of my legs and over my boots, tossing them only God knew where. He undid his own jeans as he moved over me again, and I couldn't help but bite my lip as I watched the denim slide down his muscled thighs, his erection standing thick and tall between his hips. I wanted to reach out to him, but he had made it clear that he was the one in charge. As he climbed back onto the bed, he spread my legs and settled himself between them, and when the weight of him rested on top of me, I knew that I would never feel so good again. Slipping one hand under me and arching my back, he leaned in and kissed me with all the sweetness and control I could take. Just as I was about to die from wanting more, I felt the pressure of his hip between my thighs. I broke the kiss on a gasp and pressed myself against him. Dropping his head down to my shoulder, he slowly began to slide inside me. Too slowly. I bit down on his earring, and what control he had over his body seemed to snap. Once again growling, he slammed into me so hard I yelped, and slid his free hand around my throat. His body pounding into me, mine struggling to keep up with his pace. His hand cutting off all but the faintest intake of air, and holding my head angled directly towards his face. He stared down at me as he thrust. It only took a moment for the pressure to begin building within me. He didn't stop though, didn't even slow down. Sliding his hand from my throat, he moved down my body, pinching my nipple on its way to my thigh. His other hand snaked out from under my back and wrapped into my hair. I wrapped my legs around his hips and matched his furiously paced thrust for thrust. When I came again, he only drove into me twice more before he stilled. His muscles clenched, his pleasure pouring into mine. When he collapsed on top of me, I wound one hand through his curls and stroked his back with the other. I knew I was going to be sore in the morning, but it was definitely worth it. The end. This story is entitled Renee Young / Paige Lesbian Fanfiction, and it was written by Showing Off. Renee Young was backstage waiting for the next person to interview at the Staples Centers in Los Angeles for SummerSlam. She was extremely nervous about interviewing this person. For some reason, every time Renee interviewed Paige, she got very nervous. She always felt something when Paige was close to her.
She felt horny.
Renee wasn't sure if it was awkwardness or something more than that. She couldn't explain it, really. Paige always seemed to look deep in Renee's eyes whenever they talked, and it caused butterflies in Renee's stomach. She had a feeling and knew what it was, but wasn't too sure. All Renee knew was that Paige made her nervous, in a good way. Renee was pulled out of her thoughts when the WWE cameraman notified her that Paige would be there shortly. As seconds went by, Renee was getting more and more anxious. Even though she was nervous, she couldn't wait to see Paige.
Paige was always in a good mood, behind the camera at least. Renee admired Paige's Hill character on TV. She played it out extremely well, and Renee enjoyed her being a bad girl. Renee felt a tingle when she began to wonder how Paige was in bed. She wasn't even sure if Paige was lesbian or bi, but Renee was definitely attracted to her. Now she knew that's what it was. All the bundle of nerves. It was because she was attracted to Paige. Renee pulled her phone out to send a quick tweet over Twitter. Once she was finished, she put her phone away and looked up. There she was.
There she was, just walking down the street singing. Tapping her fingers and shuffling her feet singing. She looked good, she looked fine. She looked good, she looked fine, and I nearly lost my mind.
In her black leather jacket and red wrestling shorts. Renee swallowed hard when Paige approached her. Hey, Renee, Paige said with a weak smile. Her knees went weak when she saw Renee smile back at her. God, how she loved Renee's smile. It was the best smile she had ever seen on a female. Paige was attracted to Renee, and she wasn't ashamed to admit it to herself. If Paige knew whether Renee was at least interested in women, she would have told her how she felt a long time ago. It was hard to see Renee every day and not be able to tell her how she felt. Hi, Paige! Renee greeted back. The WWE producer immediately signaled for the interview to start. As the interview went along, Paige did something that sent a shiver through Renee's body. Paige stepped forward and got dangerously close to Renee. She was just portraying her character, but Renee had a feeling she was doing it for other reasons too. She tried to hide the fact that she was nervous and tried to stay calm. As Paige looked into her eyes and talked slowly, Renee wanted nothing more but to yank her close to her body and attack her lips with her own. She swallowed hard again and looked away like she usually would with other interviews. Once the interview was over, both Paige and Renee sighed in relief, and their nerves were calmer.
Oh.
Good luck in your match, Renee blurted out. Even she was surprised she was able to say that. Thanks. Paige smiled and brushed her hand down Renee's arm. The touch sent shivers down Renee's back and her body felt weak. Maybe after I win, we can celebrate, Paige said. She felt her heart pumping fast, and she was sure it was going to explode at any moment. She was hoping Renee caught on what she was saying, but most importantly, she was hoping that Renee would say yes.
Yes!
Renee noticed the plead in Paige's voice. She wasn't dumb. She knew what Paige meant, which pretty much confirmed for her that Paige was indeed attracted to women. She was happy about that. Yeah, definitely. Your room or mine? She asked with some seduction in her voice. Paige smiled at her and reached for the pocket of her jacket to retrieve an extra room key. She handed it to Renee and made sure their fingers brushed against each other. Mine! I'll be waiting! She winked at her and walked away. As Renee got all her things ready to leave, she watched Paige's match versus AJ Lee. She was a fan of AJ, but she of course couldn't go against Paige. Renee thought Paige deserved to be a champion for a long time. After some intense clotheslines and kicks by AJ, Paige finally got the upper hand. Before Renee knew it, she looked up at the screen and Paige's hand was raised. The pin was so fast that Renee missed it just by glancing away for a second. She was still happy either way though. Before Paige could get to the locker room, Renee left and drove off to the hotel. She arrived and retrieved all her bags before heading inside and entering the elevator. Even though she knew Paige was getting there after her, she still felt nervous about entering Paige's hotel room. She was nervous, but also excited. She finally arrived at the room and slid the key card to get inside. She went in and settled her things next to the bed. She looked around and saw a couple of Paige's bags scattered on the floor. Renee took a deep breath before sitting down on the bed. Her body temperature was heating up, so she took her sweater off. 30 minutes had passed and Renee finally heard the door of the room open up. She stood up and immediately met eyes with Paige. Renee smiled at her and Paige returned it. She walked across the room to settle her bags and the Divas title down on the floor. So, you feel it too, right? Paige finally spoke up. Feel what? Renee asked and stood up from the bed. She knew what Paige was talking about, but she wanted to hear her say it. Paige chuckled and walked over to her. She grabbed Renee by her hips and pulled her closer. Paige was slightly taller than Renee, but she had no trouble leaning forward and pressing her lips on hers. Renee tangled her fingers in Paige's long black hair and kissed her back. They both moaned in unison when Paige poked her tongue out and Renee immediately opened up for her. Paige entered her tongue in Renee's mouth and instantly entwined with Renee's. They both touched each other much as they could, and they were both turned on to the extreme. They literally tore each other's clothes off, and by the time they reached the bed, they were already naked. Renee got comfortable as Paige started to crawl on top of her and straddled her lap. Their lips connected once more, and Paige started to grind against Renee's hips. Paige reached down and began to rub Renee's clit with her finger. Renee moaned into Paige's mouth and broke the kiss to arch her head back in pleasure.
Oh.
Paige kissed down Renee's neck while still rubbing her clit. She continued her way down her body, hearing Renee moan. Going a little lower, Paige finally reached her destination. She began to lick Renee's pussy, and that sent her crazy. Oh, fuck, Paige! Renee moaned and tangled her fingers in Paige's soft hair. Paige continued to lick and eat her out. She then stopped rubbing her pussy and, without warning, slid a finger inside Renee's pussy. She thrusted her finger in and out while she licked her pussy folds. Renee was quickly losing it, and her moans got louder. She sat up and brought one of her hands back for support on the bed. She arched her head back and gasped when Paige added another finger. You like me finger fucking you? Paige talked dirty to Renee, who could only nod in response. When Paige moaned, Renee felt the vibration on her pussy, and that sent her over the edge. Oh, I'm coming! Oh, God! Renee shook her head when Paige's fingers thrusted faster, and her orgasm rushed through her body. Paige smiled at the fact that she could get Renee to come that deeply. Renee collapsed on the bed as her orgasm began to fade away. Paige slid her fingers out of Renee's pussy and began to lick the sweet juice of Renee's pussy. Sweet, Paige said and smiled. Renee peeked down at her and gave a weak smile. Her knees were weak at the moment, and the orgasm wore her out, slightly. Renee giggled and sat up. She leaned in and kissed Paige passionately. She pulled away and then pushed Paige to her back on the bed. Renee hovered over her and kissed all over Paige's face. Her forehead, nose, cheeks, and then finally, her lips. She took one of Paige's 34C breasts in her hand and gave it a squeeze, while she licked and bit on her neck. Oh, fuck, Renee! Pinch my nipples! Paige requested. Renee obeyed and took one of Paige's nipples in between her thumb and index finger. Paige moaned loud when Renee pinched it lightly. She brought her hands behind Renee and got a hold of her plump white ass, slapping and then squeezing it. Renee gasped at Paige's roughness, but loved it. She giggled and then lowered herself down Paige's slim body, leaving trails of kisses everywhere. She continued until she finally reached Paige's already wet shaved pussy. Renee licked her lips and then brushed her tongue up the sweet wet folds. Paige moaned and got a tight grip on the bed sheets as Renee began to lick her pussy like a savage animal. Paige squirmed at Renee's rough ways. Renee looked up at her and smiled. She pulled her lips away from Paige's pussy. Your pussy is so good, she whispered, and then went back to sucking and licking on the wet folds. She licked up Paige's juices and savored them by licking her lips. She brought one of index fingers and entered it slowly deep inside Paige's hot core. Oh, ugh! Paige moaned out loud, not caring if people in the room next door to them could hear. The feeling was too good, and she wished it would last forever. Renee thrusted her finger in and out of her tight pussy. She added another finger to stretch her out and began to lick her clit. Paige sat up when she felt her orgasm approaching. She grabbed a handful of Renee's blonde locks as she moaned and panted while the orgasm hit her body like a truck. She closed her eyes because the orgasm was so strong. She was getting dizzy. As the peak of the orgasm faded away, she laid back down on the bed with her hair on her face. Renee took her fingers out and sucked them clean. She crawled up Paige's body and gave her a passionate kiss. After Renee pulled away, Paige kept her eyes closed. The orgasm had worn her out, just like it did to Renee. "You really know how to celebrate," Paige said softly, with her eyes still closed. Renee laughed and laid on the bed next to her. "I could say the same about you." She kissed Paige's semi-sweaty neck. Paige snuggled up to Renee, and she immediately wrapped her arms around her frame. The orgasms really tired them out, and they both would fall asleep quickly. "We have to celebrate more often," was the last thought they both had before falling asleep.
This story is entitled The God and the Goddess, and it was written by NWF4 member Golden Destino. Today was the huge day. Tokyo, Japan, January 4th. It was Wrestle Kingdom 13, but the first ever New Japan Pro Wrestling vs. World Wrestling Entertainment show. The card consisted of John Cena,
the champ, is here!
Versus Hiroshi Tanahashi. The Young Bucks versus the Usos. Switchblade Jay White versus Jeff Hardy. And Shinsuke Nakamura versus Kazuchika Okada. But the main event was Kenny Omega versus Roman Reigns, a title for title match. Kenny being the IWGP International Wrestling Grand Prix Heavyweight Champion, and Reigns being the Universal Champion.
This is my yard now.
There stood the man in the New Japan locker room, Bullet Club leader Kenny Omega, sporting the IWGP Heavyweight Championship around his waist. He thought to himself about how this match could go, but then his music hit and he walked out. Introducing, from Winnipeg, the Beast Bout Machine, the IWGP Heavyweight Champion, Kenny Omega. And from Pensacola, Florida, the Universal Champion, Roman Reigns. DDD. The match started with plenty of crowd back and forth, cheering Kenny and booing Roman. The two men traded punches with each other, Kenny getting the upper hand as he hit Roman with the Ai Shiodo. 1-2 kickout. Roman got straight up, lifting Kenny up onto his shoulders to hit a Samoan drop. No selling the move, Kenny got straight back up before running the ropes, hitting his signature Kotaro Crusher. After a few moments, Roman got up and hit a Superman punch out of nowhere. 1, 2, kick out from Omega! Roman then got to the corner, telling Kenny to get up as he ran towards him, but Kenny hopping over. Kenny jumped on the ropes for a springboard, but caught with despair. 1, 2, 3, no way! Kenny kicked out! The match went on for plenty more time, the overall time being 53-28. Roman went for a stunning fourth Superman punch, but as he ran, Kenny nailed the V-trigger. The crowd in very loud cheers as Roman was lifted onto the shoulders of Kenny, blood dripping down the Canadian's face. He climbed to the top rope, hitting the one-winged angel. 1, 2, 3, DDD! Kenny stood in the middle of the ring with the two titles, raising them high as his theme song was drowned out by fireworks. Roman had gotten up, holding the back of his neck before extending his hand out to the Canadian. Kenny looked him in the eyes. Akushinashi Manu. He spoke in Japanese. The crowd letting out a small chair before kneeing the hand out of the air, stepping beside Roman and raising his hand. Roman just nodded, walking back up the ramp while the rest of the Bullet Club celebrated with Kenny. Getting back to the locker room, Kenny was greeted with many forms of congratulations, before getting the one special version of a congrats. Taking off his ring gear and changing back into formal clothing after taking a shower. His newly dyed blonde hair was a slight red. He had the two belts in both hands as he looked in the doorway with a small chuckle. There stood the goddess herself, the Raw Women's Champion, Alexa Bliss. "So you're this wrestling god everyone's talking about, huh?" She said in a sort of mocking tone, swaying her hips to the side, her arms crossed to her chest. Huh? I think so. I mean, no one here even has half my wrestling ability. He replied with confidence. She just nodded her head, walking into the room and shutting the door behind her, sitting herself down next to her. Let me take care of this cut. He just replied with a nod, setting the towels down on top of his luggage bag. Bliss sat down next to the Canadian, running her hands through his hair. That was an amazing match, by the way. Kenny just flashed a smile in her direction. Her hands had slowly moved down to his face, the smile on Alexis's face now turning into a small grin, while she climbed on top of him, sitting in his lap. With some blush spreading across his face, Kenny moved his hands onto the goddess's curvy hips. The 5-foot girl from Ohio soon placed her hands on the back of his head, pulling Omega into a kiss. Kenny just closed his eyes, returning the kiss as he ran his hands through her hair. Alexa then pulling back, whispering, "This is my form of congratulations, Kenny." Alexa sent a small wink toward the Canadian before sliding her shirt off of her smaller body, revealing that she wasn't wearing a bra.
Oh, yeah!
Bliss then slid her bottom attire down her legs, and again, was wearing nothing underneath. Kenny just looked on while taking off his own shirt. As Kenny stood up, Alexa had knelt down in front of the Canadian man, her small hands moving to the waistband of his shorts. The goddess was soon looking up at Kenny after the two had been undressed, Bliss holding Kenny's 10-inch cock in her small hands.
Damn!
Like what you're seeing, Lexi? Kenny said, just oozing confidence, as Bliss gave him a small nod. She soon moved a little closer, taking the tip of Kenny inside of her warm mouth, causing Kenny to let out a small groan. Again, she winked up at him while she started to move her head up and down the cock, moaning softly as Kenny moved his hands onto her head. Alexa was soon able to deep throat the dick of the best spout machine, gagging a little bit. There you go, shorty. Kenny groaned out, biting hard on his bottom lip before he started to thrust his cock down her throat, sending another loud gag from the goddess. Alexa continued to bob her head on Kenny's leg, Kenny letting out another groan before releasing his cum inside the mouth of the goddess. She swallowed it all, wiping off her mouth as she watched Kenny's cock throb back to its full size. Wow, that tasted freaking amazing, Kenny, Alexa said. Yeah, I know, he replied, smirking. Alexa chuckled before laying down on the floor, spreading her thick legs before exposing her wet pussy to the cleaner. He went over to her before kneeling in front of the goddess, lifting the Ohio native's legs onto his own shoulders. Alexa softly bit on her lip as Kenny slid the tip of his cock inside of Alexis's pussy, receiving a loud moan from the goddess. Kenny started to thrust his hips, the Canadian's cock moving in and out of Alexa, while moans came from the mouth of Bliss. Fuck, Kenny. Alexa moaned out as Kenny started to pick up some speed, his balls smacking against Alexa's thick ass. The moans from the goddess only became louder as Kenny started to thrust himself harder into Alexa. Yeah! Master! She moaned out in almost a yell. I guess you could say she was in pure bliss. The two had switched to the doggy-style position, Kenny thrusting into Alexa from behind, while he pulled back on her hair. Fuck! Treat me like the slut I am! Alexa said while she moaned out louder, backing herself against the large length of the cleaner. He gave hard smacks to the thick cheeks of Bliss, which resulted in louder moans from her. Yes! Fucking spank me, Kenny! Bliss started to twerk on his large cock, as he only smacked and squeezed the ass of the goddess, pulling his cock out of her pussy, sliding to the tip inside of Alexis's tight asshole. The eyes of Bliss opened wide. Fuck! You're so huge! Ah! Alexa screamed at the top of her lungs, while Kenny started to drill his cock in and out of her tight asshole. The pain now turning into pleasure for Alexa, while she started to moan, Yes, Daddy! Fuck my slutty ass! And Kenny did just that, thrusting even harder into the goddess. Kenny could feel his cock start to twitch, so he thrusted even harder inside of Bliss's ass. Alexa moaning loudly while Kenny pulled back her hair, coming deep in her asshole. The goddess bit hard on her lip, locking a deep kiss to Kenny, which he returned. I belong to you now, Kenny, Alexa said with a large grin on her face, laying back on the floor as she quickly got dressed. Walking out of the room, Kenny just chuckled to himself. Well, that was quite the way to say congrats. Maybe I can get used to this. The end. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. As always, we hope that you enjoyed this week's stories. If you enjoyed these stories, please be sure to like, review, and subscribe to us on iTunes. Visit us elsewhere online, including Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Tumblr, and as always, our official website, WrestleEroticapod.com. Thank you and have a good week.